All right, so I'm looking at manipulating formulae or rearranging formulas or formulae or rearranging equations, manipulating equations. Okay, you'll see I called a couple of different things. First thing I'm going to do is just run through a few examples that tie this back to stuff that we've done already and we already know how to do, and then I'll start running through the few examples that are in your book. So we get a question like this. So make x the subject of this formula. Ax is equal to b. And make x the subject of the formula just means rewrite the formula so that it is x equals something. So just x on its own equal to something. So not ax, not bx, not x over a, not x over b, just x on its own. And if we think back, where else in the course are we looking to just get a letter on its own equal to something? Where is that our goal? Well, it's in algebra where we're solving equations, okay? And in lots and lots of places in the course where we're solving equations. So if I gave you this question here, solve for x, 3x is equal to 12, how would you solve it? So 3x is equal to 12. Well, you want just x on the left-hand side. So there's two ways of thinking about this. You can say this is x multiplied by 3. So if I bring multiplied by 3 over, the opposite of that is divide. So x is equal to 12 divided by 3. Or else you can think of it as I want to get rid of this multiplied by 3 on the left-hand side. So I will divide the left-hand side by 3. If I divide the left-hand side by 3, I need to do the same thing to the right-hand side. Again, I end up with x is equal to 12 divided by 3. All right, so it's up to you how you find it easier to think about those, that moving something or doing the same thing to both sides. I would say each way is useful in some situations, so it's useful to be kind of comfortable with talking about it both ways. Anyway, 3x is equal to 12. Let's say I'm going to move this 3 over. So I get x is equal to 12 divided by 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So x is equal to 4 is the answer to that equation. All right, I'm going to do the same thing over here. Okay, so if you look, this is set up the exact same way. So something x is equal to something. 3x is equal to 12. So ax is equal to b. I want to get x on its own, so I need to move the a. At the moment, this is x multiplied by a. So I'm going to bring the multiplied by a over. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. So x is equal to b divided by a. And that's you done. Okay, x is now the subject of that formula. X is equal to something. That means x is the subject. If I had to move the x over and got a is equal to b over x, a would be the subject of the formula. Okay, so that's all you're being asked to do when you're asked to make something the subject of the formula. You can't divide b by a, so you're done here. You can't do that final step that we did when we're solving. So that's the answer for that one. Next one. So write x in terms of y. X over 4 is equal to y. So x in terms of y is another way of asking make x the subject of the formula. So x in terms of y means x is equal to y's and numbers. All right, so I could have asked this question, make or write x in terms of a and b, and it would have been the same question. So make something the subject or write something in terms of something, same question. So write x in terms of y means I want x on its own. Again, before kind of doing this one, using the letters, I'll go over here and solve a similar equation that we're probably more familiar with. So solve for x. X over 4 is equal to 5. So I want to get rid of the over 4. I want to get rid of the divided by 4. So if you multiply both sides by 4, you'll get rid of a divided by 4. If you multiply the left-hand side by 4, the multiplied by and divided by 4 cancel, and you're just left with x. If you multiply the right-hand side by 4, we'll do it in 2 steps. 4 multiplied by 5, so x is equal to 20. Okay, so I talked about it there in terms of multiplying both sides by the same thing, but equally x divided by 4, bring it over, it becomes multiplied by 4 times 5 is 20. So x is equal to 20 there. Let's do the same thing here. Okay, so x in terms of y, I want x on its own. So let's bring the divided by 4 over and it becomes multiplied by 4. So x is equal to 4y. All right. Next one then, make a the subject of this equation. A minus b is equal to c. So I've got a minus b. If I want a to be the subject of the equation, I want a on its own. So I need to get rid of this minus b. All right, we're probably happy enough with how we do that. But again, I'll just go over here to the other side of the page and do a similar example, but how we've maybe seen it before in solving equations. So if you got solved for a minus 3 is equal to 7, what would you do? You'd move the minus 3 over and it will become plus 3, or else add 3 to both sides and you get a is equal to 7 plus 3, so a is equal to 10. So if you're asked to solve for a, the answer is 10 there. Over here, we're not going to be able to go quite as far, we're not going to be able to solve it, but make a the subject of the equation, move the minus b over, and it becomes plus b. So a is equal to c plus b. And you're done. Okay, so a is now the subject of the equation. A is equal to other letters. Again, you could have asked that, write a in terms of b and c, and it would be the same answer. Okay, so a is equal to means a is the subject, or a is in terms of other letters. Just a couple of kind of slightly different examples here where I'm kind of using what I would actually use manipulating formula for. So make h the subject of this formula here. So volume is equal to pi r squared h. So this is the formula for getting the volume of a cylinder. So what if I want to make h the subject? So let's say I've got one of those questions where I have the volume and I'm looking for the height. So one of the things that goes into the formula is my unknown. So I need to rearrange this formula. A couple of different ways you could think about this, but I would say you've got height multiplied by pi r squared. So height multiplied by pi r squared is equal to volume. So if you move multiplied by pi r squared over, what's the opposite of that? It's divide by pi r squared. So volume divided by pi r squared is equal to h, and you're done. Okay, so h is now the subject. The formula is something equals h. Doesn't matter which, you could have h equals v over pi r squared, it would mean the same thing. It doesn't matter if your subject is on the left hand side or the right hand side, as long as it's on its own. Okay, so now h is the subject of this formula. I have a formula that if I know volume and radius, I can get the height of a cylinder, and that might be useful in different situations. Over here then, write m in terms of k. So I've got k is equal to 8m over 5. This will be a formula for converting between kilometers and miles. So if you sub the number in there for miles, it would tell you how many kilometers it was. So what's 3 miles in kilometers? So 8 times 3 over 5. 8 times 3 over 5 is equal to 4.8. Okay, so 3 miles is equal to 4.8 kilometers. That's what that formula is doing for me. So if I sub something in for miles, it will tell me how many kilometers it is. All right, so it told me that 3 miles is equal to 4.8 kilometers. I'll just return to that in a second when I have the formula switched around. So now it's telling me to write m in terms of k. So m in terms of k means you want m on its own in the same way k is. Okay, so we need to rearrange stuff. So I'll have to do this one in 2 steps. So 8m divided by 5. It's the divided by 5 that will be the first thing I move over. So It's the opposite of dividing by 5. It's multiplying. So move the divided by 5 over. It becomes multiply. So 5k is equal to 8m. It's m in terms of k. I want m to be the subject. So I'm going to move the m multiplied by 8 over. So multiplied by 8, if you move it over, it becomes divided by. So 5k divided by 8 is equal to m. So there's m in terms of k, or m is now the subject of the formula. It is on its own, okay? So number of miles is equal to 5 times the number of kilometers divided by 8. So I know that 4.8 kilometers and 3 miles are the same thing. So what happens if I sub 4.8 in here? So 5 brackets 4.8, close your brackets, over 8 is equal to 3. Okay, so I've got to run it through the formula in reverse. All right. And that formula is not the most complicated. We might have guessed that that will be the opposite of it, but there are other formulas where it's not going to be obvious kind of looking at it straight away, and you need to do this bit of work. So that's, I suppose that's one thing you could use it for. You could kind of reverse formulas or use formulas to give you something else, depending on what information that you have. All right, there's just one more example I want to do, which kind of ties it back to algebra, and then I will, in a separate video, do the examples that are in your book. So this one here, make D the subject of this formula. So it's A is equal to B plus C over D. So A is equal to B plus C over D. So I want to make D the subject of the formula. I want to get D on its own. So before I do that, I just want to look at something over here that we've encountered in algebra. It comes up a lot in trigonometry, where we're looking for one of the sides in a triangle. So for example, solve for x. 2 is equal to 8 over x. So if I'm solving for x, if I want to find out what x is equal to, I want to get x on its own. And what we're tempted to do here, when an equation is set up like this, is move the 8. Okay, and because the x is what I want to get on its own, so why not just move the 8 over? The reason I don't do that is it's a bit more complicated than it looks. Okay, if you were to move that 8 over, that in its current position on top of the fraction will be multiplied by 8. So by moving it over, it will be divided, so you get 2 over 8 equals. And then because you're moving it from the top, you're not just left with 8, you would be left with 1. You're not just left with x, sorry, you'd be left with 1 over x. So you're not actually left with x on its own, you're still left with a fraction and x on the bottom. So even if what you're solving for is on its own on the bottom, you can't just kind of pluck the thing on top, move it over, and be left with the bottom of the fraction. Okay, so an alarm bell should go off when you're solving for something on the bottom of a fraction. Okay, so the way to start this one is to move the x. It's a little bit counterintuitive because we want to get the x on its own. What we're doing is we're moving it over beside something else, but it is the first step to take here. So when you're solving for something on the bottom like that, don't just move the top and think you've got x on its own. Like I said, if you move the 8 there, you'd be left with 1 over x, which is not really getting us that much closer to the solution. So move the x over. So this is 8 divided by x. If you move divided by x over, it becomes multiplied by. So 2x is equal to 8. Now I've got x multiplied by 2. So bring the multiplied over and it becomes divide, or else you've got 2x. So divide both sides by 2. 2x divided by 2 is x. And then you've got 8 divided by 2 on the other side. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So x is equal to 4. 2 is equal to 8 divided by x. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So that checks out. That's the correct answer. All right. So it's a similar situation over here where I make D the subject of this formula. A is equal to B plus C over D. So I might want to move the B plus C over and think I'd just be left with D then. But again, if you move B plus C over, you'd be left with 1 over D. You're not asked to make 1 over D the subject of the formula. You're asked to just make D on its own the subject of the formula. So first step here will be move the divided by d over, and it becomes multiplied by d. So you would get AD is equal to B plus C. So you've moved divided by d over, it becomes multiplied by, so AD is equal to B plus C. So now I want to get d on its own, so let's move the multiplied by a over. What's the opposite of multiplying by a? It is dividing by a. So d is equal to b plus c all over a. So if you're moving the a over, it's over the entire right hand side, even if there's more than one term there. So d is now the subject of this equation. So b plus c divided by a. Again, other way you could be asked that would be write d in terms of a, b, and c. And that's what they mean by d in terms of a, b, and c. All right, so that's a brief introduction to this, kind of tying it back into solving in algebra. In the next video then I'll work through some examples from your book.